For 30 years, Amy Mickelson never spoke publicly. She stood in the background, smiled for the cameras, and supported her husband through every victory and every defeat. When Phil won the Masters, she was there. When he lost the US Open, she was there. When she battled breast cancer in 2009, and Phil walked away from golf to be by her side, that image of devotion became legendary. She was the perfect golf wife, the silent rock behind the smiling champion. And that's exactly why what happened in June 2026 hit so hard, because the silence finally broke. A private message emerged that wasn't meant for the public eye, and the woman who spent 3 decades quietly standing beside Phil Mickelson suddenly became the source of a bombshell that changed everything we thought we knew about him. Think about that for a second. When the quietest person in the room finally speaks, you know something has shifted, something has cracked. And when the message involves betrayal, private pain, and a man who doesn't recognize himself anymore, the golf world doesn't just listen, it stops. So what exactly was this message? Who sent it? Who received it? And what did it reveal? But more importantly, why did Amy break her 30 years of silence now? What happened behind closed doors that finally pushed her to speak? We're going to unpack every layer of this story. Not the gossip, not the rumors, the real timeline, the real players, and the real reason this private message has thrown Phil Mickelson's legacy into chaos. But let me be honest about something. For decades, we all bought into the image of Phil as the good guy, the family man, the one who got it right while Tiger was falling apart. We wanted to believe that smile was real, and maybe it was, for a long time. But somewhere along the way, that man started disappearing. And when the woman who knew him best finally lifted the curtain, what she revealed wasn't just a marriage in trouble. It was a man who had become a stranger to everyone who loved him. Let's go back to the beginning. Not the start of Phil's career. You know that story. The beginning of Phil and Amy as a team. They married in 1996, back when Phil was still chasing his first major. Amy wasn't just a wife in the background. She was his anchor, the one who kept him grounded when the pressure got too heavy, the one who reminded him why he played the game. In 2009, when Amy was diagnosed with breast cancer, Phil proved that anchor was mutual. He stepped away from the tour to be her full-time caregiver. He talked about quitting golf entirely. That moment, that image of Phil pushing through the pain, staying by her side through chemotherapy, cemented his reputation as the family man, the hero, the one who got his priorities straight. That was the Phil we all rooted for. That was the Phil who could do no wrong. But public images are fragile things. They're built on carefully managed moments. And while we were all applauding Phil for being the devoted husband, something was already shifting underneath. Something that wouldn't fully reveal itself until years later. You see, people don't become different overnight. It's a slow process. Small compromises at first, small lies, small justifications that make the next transgression easier. And for Phil, that process started around 2015. That's the year insiders point to as the turning point. Not one single event, a collection of them. More drinking, more time away from home. A restlessness that his closest friends began noticing. One former friend described it bluntly. He started drinking more than anyone had ever seen. He was never the guy who needed a bottle at every dinner. But then it became routine. And with the drinking came other things. Other things. That phrase covers a lot of ground. When you connect the dots, it paints a disturbing picture. By 2015, Phil wasn't just the lovable gambler who took risky shots on the course. He was taking risks off the course too. Risks that would eventually cost him everything. The drinking was only the beginning. What happened at a tournament in New York that year would reveal a side of Phil that made everyone who knew him question if they ever really knew him at all. Let's rewind to the 2015 Barclays tournament in New York. Phil invited fellow pro Pat Perez and his wife Ashley to stay at his villa. Seemed friendly. A top player sharing his space with a colleague. But what happened behind those closed doors would become one of the most disturbing allegations in golf history. According to Ashley Perez, it was a normal evening, wine on the terrace, casual conversation. Then Pat went to the bathroom. And in those few minutes alone, Phil pulled out his phone. He showed Ashley a photo, a nude photo of himself, fully exposed, flexing his bicep. Then he made an offer so brazen it's almost hard to believe. He said, "Tonight I'll leave my bedroom door open. When Pat falls asleep, I want you to come find me." Let that sink in. This wasn't a drunken mistake in a bar. This was a calculated move. In the home of a man who was supposed to be a friend, Ashley rejected him immediately. She told Pat the next day, and Phil spent months apologizing, trying to make it right. But here's the part that hits hardest. That incident didn't stop Phil's slide. It actually accelerated it, because once you cross a line like that, once you betray a friendship in such a degrading way, the guilt either forces you to change or pushes you deeper into denial. Phil chose denial. He told himself it was a one-time thing, too much wine. But the pattern was already there, and it kept repeating. That night in New York was just the first fracture. By 2021, the cracks were everywhere. Inside private clubs, inside his marriage, and inside the family home where Amy was starting to realize she was living with a stranger. The Madison Club in California. That's where the next chapter unfolded. Phil had been a member there for nearly a decade, but in 2021 he left suddenly. The official story was that he voluntarily resigned, but club insiders say it was Amy who forced the move. One senior manager recalled a phone call from Phil and Amy's wealth management team. The message was direct: sell the house immediately. He's done at Madison. The implication was clear. Amy was cleaning up his mess. Again. Then came the Bridges Club. This is where the tracking trick happened. Phil knew Amy was monitoring his location, so he came up with a scheme straight out of a spy movie. He'd give a kid at the club's golf shop $500 to take his phone and drive around the course for 3 or 4 hours. Meanwhile, Phil would be somewhere else entirely. Amy was watching a dot on a map that wasn't even him. The betrayal wasn't just physical, it was psychological. He was actively deceiving her while she sat at home, thinking he was being faithful. And at the Farms Club, the allegations turned physical. A female employee reportedly filed a complaint about inappropriate contact. Phil's team later said the misunderstanding was cleared up, but the damage was done. He was no longer welcome at any of these places. By this point, Amy had to be asking herself the hardest question. Is this the man I married? Is this the man who held my hand during chemo? Because the Phil she knew would never have done these things. The Phil she knew would never have paid a teenager to run a phone marathon just to avoid her eyes. She fought cancer and won, yet she couldn't fight the thing that was slowly erasing the man she loved. When she finally spoke, the message she delivered left no doubt about how far he had fallen. June 26, 2026. That's the date everything changed. Golf journalist Alan Shipnuck published an explosive investigation on Scratch Golf. The report detailed years of allegations against Phil, the 2015 Barclays incident, the club departures, the tracking trick, and it revealed something new, that Phil's behavior wasn't just a series of mistakes. It was a pattern that had been building for a decade. The golf world was stunned, but the real shock came 3 days later. On June 29, 2026, Amy Mickelson broke her silence. Through a spokesperson, she released a statement that sent shockwaves through the sport. She said, "Throughout their 35-year relationship, his wife, Amy Mickelson, has supported Mr. Mickelson and their family with extraordinary grace, unwavering love, and the belief that people are measured not only by their failures, but by what they do to make them right." That was the message. That was the private statement that was never meant to be public. And it changed everything, because Amy Mickelson never speaks. For 30 years, she stayed quiet. She let Phil be the star, the legend, the face of the family. But now, she was acknowledging his failures. She was acknowledging that there were things that needed to be made right. She was confirming, in the most dignified way possible, that the man she married had gone terribly wrong. But she didn't stop there. Her team also pushed back on the narrative that she was being dragged into this unwillingly. They said some of the allegations were false. Others, they admitted, revisited mistakes Phil had already acknowledged, publicly or privately. Think about that phrase, mistakes he had already acknowledged. That means Phil knew. He knew what he had done. He had admitted it to her privately, and she had been sitting on that truth for years, protecting him, shielding him from the public, until she couldn't anymore. The message was out and the silence was broken. What haunted every golf fan who read those words was this. What finally made Amy decide to speak? The answer is complicated. It wasn't one thing. It was a decade of betrayals, compounded by the Scratch Golf investigation that brought everything into the open. Ashley Perez had already posted on Instagram saying, "I will rise up and stand next to the millions of women who have been silenced to protect the evil and darkness that lurks amongst us." That post, combined with Shipnuck's reporting, forced Amy's hand. She couldn't stay silent anymore. Not because she wanted revenge, because staying silent was becoming complicity. And the woman who had stood by Phil through cancer, through career highs and lows, could no longer stand by while his truth was being told by everyone except her. So she spoke, quietly, dignified, but devastatingly clear. Phil withdrew from the Open Championship the very next day, his first absence from that major in 17 years. The private message had done what no golf course ever could. It forced him to face the consequences of who he had become. The timing was brutal. The Open at Royal Birkdale was just weeks away, but Phil pulled out, citing a private family health matter. The scratch report later revealed that the health issue was related to one of Phil and Amy's children. Not Phil, not Amy, their child. That detail adds another layer of tragedy to this story. While the world was focused on the scandals, the family was quietly dealing with real pain. And Amy, who had already been through so much, was now navigating a private crisis while her husband's public reputation was crumbling. But here's the thing that makes this story so complex. Even after the message, even after the allegations, Amy hasn't walked away. Her statement used words like extraordinary grace and unwavering love. She didn't announce a divorce. She didn't denounce him completely. She acknowledged his failures while still standing by his side. That's the part that confuses people. How do you stay after learning those things? How do you love a man who would show another woman a nude photo? Who would pay to deceive you? Who would get kicked out of clubs for inappropriate behavior? The answer, according to those close to the family, is that Amy sees the man Phil used to be, the man he could still become. She believes people can change. She believes that redemption is possible, but she also knows that redemption requires acknowledgement, and that's what her message forced. Acknowledgement. The public saw a player who switched tours. The private world saw a man who switched personalities, and the wife who knew him best had to decide which one was real and whether that man was worth saving. Now we have to ask the hardest question. Is Phil Mickelson a victim of his own success, or is he a man who made a series of choices that led to this moment? The pressure of being a golf legend is real. The constant travel, the media scrutiny, the need to perform at the highest level, it wears people down. Many athletes have turned to substances or infidelity to cope. It's not an excuse, but it's a context. But Phil didn't just have a rough patch. He built a second life. He lied to his wife systematically. He humiliated her by association. He attached his legacy to a controversial tour that many fans despise. And through it all, he kept smiling that same smile. That's what makes this so chilling. The smile, the laugh, the charm. They were all still there on camera. But behind closed doors, Amy was living with a stranger. A man who would show his naked body to another man's wife. A man who would pay a teenager to deceive his spouse. A man who would burn bridges with clubs, friends, and ultimately, his own family. And the worst part? He doesn't seem to think he did anything wrong. In his mind, he's the victim. The media is out to get him. His wife is overreacting. The tour is corrupt. Everyone else is the problem. That's the definition of a man who has lost touch with reality. And when you combine that with the gambling addiction that's been rumored for years, the millions spent on bets, the risky financial moves, you start to see a pattern of self-destruction that goes far beyond golf. So here we are. In 2026, Phil Mickelson is a ghost of his former self. He's barely played this season. He missed all 4 majors, something that would have been unthinkable just a few years ago. His kids are grown, but they've witnessed their father's unraveling, and Amy is left holding the pieces of a life that was supposed to be perfect. That phrase, "he's not the same man," it's not just a headline, it's a diagnosis. And the cure might not exist. So what's next for Phil? He could still file for divorce himself. He could try to reconcile. He could fade into retirement and try to rebuild some dignity. But the damage is done. His reputation is shot. His marriage is hanging by a thread. And the fans who once adored him now look at him with pity or disgust. But I want to leave you with this thought. For all the scandals, all the betrayals, all the terrible decisions, there's still a part of Phil that we fell in love with. The guy who gave his jacket to a fan in the cold. The guy who wept with his wife after her cancer treatment. That guy is still in there somewhere. He's just buried under years of poor choices and unchecked ego. Maybe this wake-up call is exactly what he needed. Maybe losing his wife's trust, his legacy, and his spot in the game will force him to look in the mirror and ask the question he's been avoiding for a decade. Who do I actually want to be? We don't know the answer yet, and neither does Amy. But one thing is certain. The story of Phil Mickelson is far from over. It's a tragedy, but tragedies can have redemptions. The only question is whether Phil wants redemption more than he wants to be right. Before I wrap up, I want to know what you think. Was Amy right to finally speak out, or should some things stay private, even when the truth hurts? Drop your honest opinion in the comments. And if this deep dive gave you a new perspective on the story behind the headlines, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. We're here to give you the real conversations about the game we all love. Thanks for sticking around to the end. This one hurt to unpack, because we all rooted for Phil. But sometimes the hardest thing to do is look at a hero and see a flawed human being. That's what we just did. And that's the most honest conversation we can have.